Modern Horizons brought us the First Sliver. One of every color, 7/7 legendary creature that has Cascade and gives all sliver spells you cast Cascade. This is an EDH Commander deck tech featuring the First Sliver. Okay, so we've met the general. Now let's get to the other 99 in this First Sliver EDH Commander build. There's our general. And let's get right to the mana base for this 5-color deck. Now this is where, real estate is important in Magic the Gathering, particularly if we're trying to do a 5-color deck. So we're going to go through our mana base. And if you are a fan of the channel and you witnessed the Scion of the Dragon EDH Commander deck tech, you're going to see a lot of similarities between that mana base and this one. Of course, we're starting with the command tower. And of course, if we're running a Sliver deck, we're running the Sliver Hive. Path of Ancestry. That Scry ability is going to be fantastic with our Sliver in play, with our Sliver Commander in play. Reflecting Pool. Okay, so we got those 4. We got 1 each of a plains, an island, a swamp, a mountain, and of course a forest. 1 each of those. And here is where things take an upward turn, folks. We're running all 10 fetches. All 10 fetch lands. Trying to smooth the mana base in this 5-color Sliver deck. And if we've got 5 fetches, if we have 10 fetches, then we got all 10 shocks. And lastly, the last 10 lands of this mana base, we're going to run all 10 check lands. So that's 10 fetches, that's 10 shocks, 10 checks, 5 basics, and then the other 4 5-color lands for a total of 39 lands. Hinterland Harbor, and your Woodland Cemetery. So that is our mana base. Now let's move to the slivers. In this sliver build, we are running 15 2-mana cost slivers. 15 of them. Okay, and we're going to start with our pumpers. We got our Predatory Sliver, our Muscle Sliver, and our Sinew Sliver. They're going to give all slivers that we have +1/+1. And of course, if we're going back to the Tempest Muscle Sliver, it's even slivers that your opponents control, as well as the time-shifted version. So those are our first 3. Heart Sliver, another going back to Tempest. You're going to see some Tempest slivers in this build, definitely. Slivers we have are unaffected by summoning sickness, or as the keyword developed over time, they have haste. And then we've got the Wing Sliver. And then another entry from Modern Horizons, which has got to be one of the best slivers ever printed that isn't a general, the Cloud Shredder. Takes your heart, takes your winged, and you shred some clouds with this bad boy. Okay, and next up we have our mana slivers. We got the Gemhide Sliver and the Mana Weft Sliver. They're going to let our slivers tap for 1 mana of any color. And then we got some utility slivers on top of these first 8 with our Quick Sliver. Slivers that we have are going to be able to be cast as though they had flash. Hibernation Sliver, which, as we'll see later in the video, is going to be one of the best cards you can run in the First Sliver deck. Venom Sliver, giving our slivers Death Touch and hopefully warding off some potential attacks from your opponents. The Dregscape Sliver, getting our guys back with the Unearth mechanic from our graveyard. Sentinel Sliver, giving all of our slivers Vigilance. Crystalline Sliver gives all of our slivers Shroud, which at the time that this came out back during Stronghold, the keyword was yet to be developed. And finally, our Darkheart Sliver, where we can sack a sliver to gain 3 life. So this tops off our 15 2-mana cost slivers in this deck. Next, we're going to go to our 3 converted mana cost slivers, and in this we have 9. We have 9 3 mana cost slivers in this deck, which will bring our cumulative total up to this point to 24. So we'll have 24 2 and 3 converted mana cost slivers. That will be important for later in this deck tech. And the first one is the Mirror Entity. Of course, this being a changeling, it's every creature type. But the X mechanic is going to prove to be so powerful. Lifelink with the Siphon Sliver. Our Basil Sliver lets us sack a creature. Our Basil Sliver lets us sack a sliver for 2 black mana. Our Homing Sliver gives all of our slivers sliver cycling, so we can fetch what we need from our library. And another Modern Horizon contribution, the Spiteful Sliver. So whenever a sliver that you control is dealt damage, it's going to deal that much damage to target player or planeswalker. Sedge Sliver acts as both a regenerator and a pumper with a +1/+1, and tap a black, regenerate this creature as long as you control a swamp. And another Modern Horizons entry, we got the Hollowhead Sliver. All slivers that we control. Come on, camera, get in the game here. Come on. There we go. Slivers that we control have tap, discard a card, draw a card. Lets us cycle through our deck to get the components that we need to really make this sliver deck take off. Our Necrotic Sliver allows us removal across our board. And Modern Horizons returns again with the Lava Belly Sliver. Whenever a sliver that you control enters the battlefield, 1 damage to target player or planeswalker, and we gain a life. And those are our 9 3 converted mana cost slivers. So that's our total of 24 slivers. Our next 3 slivers each have 4 converted mana cost. So we're trying to keep the sliver cost down. So any slivers that are going to cost more than 3 in this deck have to be in the deck for a very significant reason. And they're very limited. So there's only 3 slivers in this deck that cost 4 mana. The first one is the Shifting Sliver. And that's because when this bad boy's in play, the only way your slivers are going to be blocked in combat is by other slivers. Next up after that is your Telekinetic Sliver. This is how you can tap down problem permanents and, unfortunately for your opponent, the ability to completely lock them or him or her out of the game. Next up is our Dormant Sliver. Yes, it does give your slivers Defender, which means we can't attack, but as we've already seen throughout the first 22 or 24 slivers, there's lots of ways in which to remove a sliver from play. The big plus, why he is so important, is whenever a sliver comes into play, you draw a card. So I think you're starting to see how the sliver engine is going to be run. And finally, we have the Psionic Sliver as a 5 converted mana cost sliver. So we had our 3 4 converted mana costs, which are in here for a very good reason. And then next up, we have our only non-legendary 5 converted mana costs, and that's the Psionic Sliver. When you can tap a sliver to deal 2 damage to a target and 3 damage to itself, if you can keep the slivers alive, as we've seen, we've got some generals, we've got some pumpers, we've got ways in which to not take that damage. And plus with the Spiteful Sliver, we have a lot of uses for the Psionic Sliver, and that is the justification for having him in this deck. Okay, so we've come to the end of the road for our slivers, except we have to get to, of course, the most powerful slivers that are, some of the most powerful slivers that are in the deck, and they're all going to be 5 converted mana cost slivers. And I think if you're a sliver fan, you know what to expect here. And the first one is going to be the Sliver Hive Lord. So that was a pretty good segue from the Psionic Sliver into the Sliver Hive Lord. If slivers you control have indestructible, you can tap those slivers to deal damage for days and they'll still be alive. Sliver Hive Lord is an auto-include. Unfortunately, it's only a 5/5, which is a bit, to me, upsetting that every other 5-color sliver that's ever been created was a 7/7, but what are you going to do? We'll take the indestructibility. Next up, of course, is the Overlord, who, with the printing of the first sliver, has been replaced as one of the primary commanders in Sliver's builds, at least for me it has. And of course, we can tap this bad boy up to search our library for a sliver and bring it to our hand. And next up, of course, we've got the Sliver Legion. This is our walking coat of arms, folks. We get this into play, and every other sliver is going to get the +1/+1 ability for each other sliver in play. This is our sliver coat of arms without having a coat of arms in the deck. And then finally, next up we have the Sliver Queen. Tapping 2, putting in a colorless creature in the play. That's a sliver token, 7/7. And this concludes our 5 mana cost slivers. Okay, so we have a total of 5 mana slivers with these 4, including the Psionic Sliver. And the only other sliver, and I italicize that, of course, the only other sliver left in the deck is Morphun. Another inclusion from Modern Horizons. And if you're familiar with Morphun, you know he's a changeling, so he's every creature type. And when he comes into play, you choose, of course, slivers, and then spells of the chosen type you cast cost 1 of each color less to cast. And he also acts as a sliver pump. So with him in play, your first sliver, aside from commander tax, of course, and all of our other 5-color slivers that we just showed here, excluding the Psionic Sliver, the Legion, the Overlord, the Hive Lord, and the Queen, they're all going to be cast for free with Morphun in play. So Morphun is an inclusion in this deck. There are our 32 slivers that we're running in this deck, not counting the first sliver. So with counting the first sliver, we got a total of 32 slivers that we're running in this deck. There are only 2 creatures in this deck that are not slivers, but their inclusion in the deck I just think that makes the deck so much more powerful. So here are the 2 non-sliver creatures that are also components of this First Sliver EDH Commander deck tech. And the first one is the Beast Whisperer. Whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. So whenever you cascade and you're casting, you're drawing cards, you're rebuilding your hand, you're bringing more and more cards into your hand, potentially more and more slivers, and we're seeing a bit more how this engine is going to run. And the only other non-sliver creature in this deck is going to be Chulane, the Teller of Tales. And same thing as the Beast Whisperer, when you cast a creature spell, you're drawing a card, but then you can put a land from your hand into play, and the blink ability that Chulane has is going to help us immensely as we continue to build the sliver engine. So yeah, we have 2 non-sliver creatures, but for my considerations, they're just in here to kind of walk around in the backgrounds and have their abilities utilized. All right, so those are the creatures that we have in this sliver deck. Next up, let's move to removal. I will admit right off the bat that there is not a lot of removal in this sliver deck. We do have some components, aside from what you saw here with the slivers themselves. These are the additional spells we have. A Swords to Plowshares, an Assassin's Trophy, gets rid of any permanent, a Cyclonic Rift, and an Anguish Unmaking. So we only have 4 removal spells in the entire deck. And that's something we got to keep an eye on. 4 removal spells is all we've got in this deck. So that could be looked at as a potential weakness, but in some ways, having too much removal could prove to be a detriment as we build our Sliver engine. And we'll come back to that later in this video. All right, so now what we have here, the next set of cards are cards that we have that are going to help us get to the slivers that we want. They're going to help us to draw more cards. They're going to help us scry around. And let's start with, of course, the most near and dear, the most dear card to me, my very first rare in any pack of Magic cards that I ever opened as a fan, Mirri's Guile. So this gives us the kind of like a half scry ability. We can look at the top 3 cards of our library. We can put them back in any order. We just cannot put them on the bottom of our library. But having this ability with the first sliver in play, allowing our slivers to be ordered by converted mana costs, really helps to maximize our abilities of getting as many slivers out in play as we possibly can. Herald's Horn for slivers reduces the mana cost by a colorless and allows us to, at the beginning of our upkeep, look at that top card, which can help with Mirri's Guile, and if it's a creature card, bring it to your hand. So in some turns, we can draw an additional card just by having the Herald's Horn in play. The Temur Ascendancy gives all of our creatures haste, which in this deck is very important. And at times, when you had enough of your pumpables out there, whenever a sliver with power 4 or greater is coming into play, you're going to draw a card off of that. The Guardian Project. I don't know how this in green should be in every single deck that's not running a token theme. Whenever a non-token creature comes into play, if it doesn't have the same name as another, which for our deck it won't aside from Sliver Token, but that doesn't trigger this anyways, you're drawing a card. Amazing, amazing card. And then the Kindred Discovery, of course. When a sliver is coming into play or when it attacks, you're drawing a card. And finally, the Vanquisher's Banner, which helps to mimic what the Beast Whisperer and Chulane does, that whenever we cast a sliver spell, we're drawing a card. Plus, it's a pumpable, another great card. So these are helping to get cards into our hands, get slivers into our hands, all necessary includes. All right, so the next set of cards are going to help us maximize our mana in addition to, the mana base. And one of the ways that we're going to do that is we're going to reduce some of the activated abilities of slivers that we have, and we're going to do that by using Training Grounds. This is going to help with the Necrotic Sliver. This is going to help with the Sliver Queen. This is going to help us immensely in trying to do the things that we want to do for as little mana as possible. And do not in any way, in any shape, or in any form downplay the significance of this card with the Sliver Overlord. Okay, that's the Training Grounds. Next up, a Cryptolith Rite, which is going to help us add mana from our slivers. This is like the Mana Weft Sliver. This is like the Gemhide Sliver. Song of Freyalise does the same thing for a couple of turns, and then once it expires, by removing that 3rd counter from this saga, each of our slivers are going to get a +1/+1 counter. They're going to have Vigilance, Trample, and Indestructible until end of turn. And finally, Mana Echoes. If you've ever paired this with the Sliver Queen, you know what this is. You know what this is all about, and you know why this is in the deck. Okay, and those are 4 enchantments that are going to help us to accelerate what we want to do in our deck for as little mana as possible. Oh, that's a pretty bad glare. Let's not put those there. We'll put them right over here. All right, very good. All right, and the next 2 cards are just a couple of green spells that are going to help us get through our library and get as many slivers and other things into play as we possibly can. And the first way that we're going to do that is with the Kindred Summons. You're going to choose Sliver. You're going to reveal from your library until you get X cards, where X is the number of slivers that you have in play, and then those babies are going right into play. If you ever hit this in a sliver deck, oh, it is so nice. It is so nice. And the only other one is your Genesis Wave. With all of the mana that we're generating, hitting a Genesis Wave to put in a bunch of our other permanents and slivers, fantastic. Fantastic. And these two are definite auto-includes in the sliver deck. We have 2 pieces of recursion for our sliver deck. The first is an individual card. It's Regrowth. Everyone is familiar with this, I'm sure. 1 in a green. Any card from your graveyard to your hand. That can help us bring back some of our other non-creature permanents if we really deem them necessary. And the only other recursion tool aside from this and the Dregscape sliver, of course, is the Patriarch's Bidding. This is living death on steroids, folks. In a tribal deck such as the slivers, you get that graveyard filled up, you hit the Patriarch's Bidding, and they come in, and if they've got haste and all of the other abilities, it's not going to be very long until that game is closed out. The only way that this could potentially backfire, and it's one of my deck building principles in EDH and Commander, sometimes a card could have a way in which of backfiring, and if you're playing against someone else that has a token, or I'm sorry, a tribal deck, maybe it's dragons or goblins, and they do the same thing that you do, it could be tough. So, with every other card, just be careful. Patriarch's Bidding, Regrowth. Okay, and we're down to our last few cards in our 99. The glare on this side is just too much. Let's put them over here. That's better. There we go. All right, so our next crop of cards, we have a few tutors in the deck. This is not an overly tutor deck. As we've already seen, we could get tons of tutors with just our slivers in play, but we do need to have some things in our deck to get the components that we need to really take this sliver engine to another level. And of course, the first one and most powerful one is going to be our Vampiric Tutor. Okay. Next up is our Enlightened Tutor, a Demonic Tutor, and lastly, a recent reprinting of Eladamri's Call in Modern Horizon to search our library for a creature card and put it into our hand. All right, those are our tutors. And lastly, we have our last three. Our last 3 cards in the 99. So you've seen the first 97, and the next 3 are 3 of the most important cards. And I will not understate that these are the cards that will really, really win and just lock everybody else out as you cycle through your deck and put every single sliver you have into play. The first card is Cloudstone Curio. Whenever a non-artifact permanent comes into play under your control, you may return another permanent you control that shares a permanent type with it to its owner's hand. So let's think, if you have Morphin in play, and you have the first sliver in play, and you cast another sliver using Morphin's ability for free, bringing the first sliver back, and then casting the first sliver again, and then bringing that other one back, or let's be even greedier. Let's say that it's the Legion or the Sliver Queen, and you're just cycling through your deck, casting everything that you possibly can with the Cascade ability. Cloudstorm Curio, in a way, kind of acts as a triggerable hibernation sliver. Very powerful. Number 98 is the Intruder Alarm. I will admit immediately, I am uneasy playing this card. If I have opponents that are trying to utilize tap abilities with their own creatures, this makes me very uneasy to play. However, when Paradox Engine got banned, I needed something to act as a replacement, and this was the best that I could do. Be careful with Intruder Alarm. It is extremely valuable to us, but it could really hurt us at the same time. Intruder Alarm. And lastly, and what I think is the single most important card outside of the first sliver, card 100 is Allurin. And as we alluded to earlier, there was a reason why we were trying to keep converted mana cost of slivers down. We have 24 slivers that cost 3 or less. And with the Lurin in play, we can cast them as an instant without paying their mana cost. And yes, again, similar to the Intruder Alarm, this is another card that can definitely hurt us. If our opponent is also playing a creature-heavy build with very, very minimal costing creatures, that could be a problem for us. It really can. You just have to, feel out the battlefield, know what your opponents are playing, and let's be honest, this is EDH, this is Commander. Not a lot of players are going to play with tons of creatures that cost 3 or less. But believe me, having the Allurin in play is so beneficial to us in the way in which we can cast a sliver that's 3 or less for free with the Allurin, and then if the first sliver is in play with the Cascade ability, extremely valuable. This is a deck that will not win you friends. You are not going to play this sliver deck with the hope that everybody is going to have a great time. This is overpowered, and if you think about it, if we still had Paradox Engine legal in this type of format, well, you can just imagine how that would work. So folks, this is my First Sliver Commander build. I appreciate any comments that anyone might have, any changes, anything that they would do differently. How do you build your sliver deck? Was there anything I could add? What would I take out? Share this with me, because who doesn't like a good sliver deck? This is MTG Burgeoning, folks. Thank you for the time. You will go forth and you will enjoy this day.